The United States Department of Energy has reaffirmed its commitment and support for the African energy industry in the areas of policy, investments, and technical know-how. This was part of the U.S.-Africa Roundtable discussion held on Thursday in Cape Town, South Africa, at the Africa Energy Week Summit for 2023. Members of the panel, which include Joshua Voles, Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Energy Department, laid out some areas of reforms that Africa's energy-producing states need to focus on. Let's take some experts.
When we talk about sustainability, we have to talk about it in more than one way. It's a multifaceted concept. And we are here, as His Excellency has pointed out, in the long history between the United States and Equatorial Guinea for the long haul. And it's the sustainability of the relationship. And that goes and that drives towards the second core priority for the United States here in Africa, which is partnership. And partnership is a word that gets thrown around a lot, and I think it can mean different things to different people. And in its application, it kind of manifests itself differently. So the partnership that we seek with Africa from a U.S. perspective in the energy space is one that's not a yes-or conversation about fuel types and fuel sources, but it's a yes-and conversation. It's a conversation that has to take into account African priorities of development, African priorities of economic progress, economic empowerment, access to power, decarbonization, and energy transition. These are all priorities that our African partners hold, and not one of them can be placed above the other. So we have to figure out ways to move in parallel with our African partners, not in sequence. And so that has to do very pragmatically, as His Excellency just mentioned, with the way that we can help our African partners develop their resources, all of their resources, in a way that is greener, cleaner, and more sustainable, more economically vibrant. We have to shift to a partnership model that helps our African partners climb the value chain and shift from the traditional relationship from the extractive industries that has only one opportunity for economic empowerment, one economic bite at the apple, rather to create additional economic opportunities and to move through the value chain of the resources that exist here in Africa. We also see tremendous opportunity to collaborate in the energy transition economy, and that is an economic opportunity that we see totaling more than $23 trillion over the next 30 years. That's a huge amount of economic opportunity at which Africa sits at the very heart, the very center with its critical minerals and the opportunities to play a central role in securing supply chains for those critical technologies as part of the energy transition. So it really does start with partnership that is founded in pragmatism that leads to power and the ability to unlock African power both within the continent and globally, and then ultimately progress, both economic, social, and environmental.
I think the role for the U.S. really to assist Africa and developing nations to develop their energy resources in a sustainable way, ever cleaner, ever more affordable, accessible, reliable energy, is to support U.S.-based energy industries that are developing technologies that are leading innovation that will accelerate energy access and help keep emissions low. Of course, the best place to start is the energy geoscience industry, because we're literally providing the eyesight for nations, for communities, to see what resources they have, to see where they can cite alternative energy development, to see where they can capture carbon. So regardless of your preferred source of energy in the energy evolution, it requires eyes on something going in, out, or through the ground, and that eyesight is literally not possible without the energy geoscience industry. So certainly prioritizing policies that can accelerate support at the very first step, the ability for nations to have information, to be able to see what is within their reach to develop, to benefit and prosper from. And then along with that, the companion is to remove impediments that cause unnecessary above ground risks so that these technologies can flourish, that industry can be attracted, and investment can come through.
Thank you very much, Judah. thank you to the Africa Energy Chambers for organizing this very important event to discuss how we can support the energy transition on the continent. The African opportunity, whether it's the integration of Africa into the global markets, whether it's the entrepreneurship across the continent, whether it's a booming population, offers a very great opportunity for the US public and the private sector. And we must congratulate the US because there's a lot of public sector capital support into the African continent. I mean, we all attended the US Africa Summit that happened in December last year in Washington, hosted by President Biden and VP Harris, with all the support and declarations. There are so many programs that they've put in place to support trade, investments, and sustainable development on the continent, and we can see a lot of that working. I think over $18 billion of support has come to the continent from this administration. But what we at Afrexim Bank would like to see is more and more collaboration with US institutions on the continent. We'd like to work more with USTDA, with the DFC. We'd like to work more with USTR. We'd like to work more with the Exim Bank. I'm pleased to say last year in December, we did sign an MOU for $500 million with the Exim Bank to actually support diaspora investments between the US and Africa. We need to go beyond that, even in the structuring of deals. And I'll give an example. Actually, we're looking at a transaction on the sidelines of this conference, and we actually agreed with the client here to do the deal between US Exim, Afrexim Bank, AFC, and the two local banks in Nigeria. That's the kind of collaboration we want to see. We want to see more deepened collaboration between US enterprises and US institutions, US private sector. Let me say something about the US private sector. The US private sector is very active, for example, in fintech and high-tech. I think there's like $5 billion investment of the fintech into Africa. But we don't see that kind of investment coming into energy and oil and gas. So is it a question of not knowing, not understanding? You see, I was in New York on the sidelines of UNGA, having a lot of conversations with some of the funds in New York and asking them, why is it that you guys don't have this appetite? We need to think how to package these deals, how to attract those kinds of investors, particularly the US private sector. The US public sector has a better understanding of the African than the US private sector. What happens is the US private sector gives the money to European investors who now put the money into Africa. We need to create a way to unpackage it, unbundling it for those US investors, particularly in New York where there's a lot of money to be able to come to the continent. So in terms of products, programs, I mean, with the full length of support. Local currency funding is important. I think we need to encourage local currency financing across the continent because of the increasing FX changes we are seeing. So structures like guarantees, credit enhancement structures will help local institutions to be able to provide financing.
Economic development is actually more important than some of the other priorities. It has to be the number one priority. So I think that's kind of where the world is today. And along with IEM, we have done a report we call Roadmap to Multi-Dimensional Transition. I think what happened is that we thought there's a linear way to get to net zero by 2050, which was kind of unrealistic given that China's goal was 2060 and India's goal was 2070, by the way, there. And Indonesia 2060, with the three of them, three of the largest emitters. So we are now in a world of multi-dimensional transition, which means everybody has a different starting point. We have to move differently at different speed. I will add two other things to that multi-dimensional transition. One is it's going to be a multi-speed transition. It's not going to be, we have to hit 2050. There's nothing magical about 2050. And as we have heard in this conference, Africa overall has had such a small contribution to emissions that economic development takes precedence. The other thing which is going to happen is going to be a multi-fuel transition. It's not going to be, and we've already heard this week, it's a lot about oil and gas. So it's not going to be only renewables, it's going to be multi-fuel, particularly in Africa and also I think in Asia. You can't just leapfrog to things which are not going to provide reliable affordable 24/7 energy. So we are moving to that world. And I would say that in the case of Africa, it's okay for the emissions to go up. It's not disaster. They need to use in Africa, and we heard from the last panel, which was excellent, that let's use the most available technology, the best available technology, which is a lot of that is in the US. For example, abating methane emissions. If you can bring some of the technology to Africa, I think it would be very good. So not start from 20 years back, but start from now. And actually, to your point, Renee, we should have companies like Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. They're not only providing servers, by the way, they're doing a lot of high-tech data analytics and technologies which they're applying in the energy industry. So I think there is a lot of opportunities in the US and Africa. I wouldn't be so bold to advise companies because they know their business very well. But I think here in Africa we don't need oil and gas investment. We talked about it. But the other thing I will make a small plug to is renewables investment. Africa, by the way, based on our data from S&P, currently $65 billion of new investment in power in Africa in the next 20 years. So for that investment, there's a huge opportunity for the private sector to come in, and they're already doing that, and more can come in. And to your point about why are they not coming in, I think one of the challenges we have seen in our work is the issue of capacity. You need more capacity. The cost of capital is still very high. So why is the cost of capital in Africa so much higher than the cost of capital in the US or in Europe, right? So I think part of that is just a perception, but part of it is, to be honest, some reality there. So I think we need to, companies in particular and the governments, the US government, needs to help build that capacity so that investments result in good